Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. The podcast flies through because it's framed around your photos. We're just going to keep going.
Perfect.
So the one I have here is, Anne and Fia.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Anna.
Yes.
Anna.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Anna and Fia. Okay. So it's a photograph in what looks to me like, unfortunately, I've been poisoned by you saying that you're in California, that it looks
Yes.
like the Pacific Northwest more than the Pacific Southwest. But it could, because the two people in the photo, it's a cute photo of a very, I'd say a toddler, like 2 to 3 years old, just walking and discovering the forest, the big, beautiful trees of the West Coast. And a woman, sensibly Anna, is walking with hands in pockets. So it's probably a little bit cool. Hair in a ponytail, wearing a jacket, wearing a backpack. And then the trail is like covered in reddish pine needles, I guess. It's a bit of shrub, but they're large, tall trees all around. Maybe not California, maybe Oregon or Washington. What's this?
This is Northern California.
Okay.
So this is not too far from the coast not too far from, I think we were close to Eureka at this place. So yeah, it was the redwoods and we were hiking towards the coast.
Nice.
We had been, I don't know, that's my daughter Fia. She, at this time when this picture was taken, we were on a little bit of vacation from Hawaii to California. And she was about 2 years old at this time, almost. And she kind of grown up going on hikes. And so I decided that this was a good exemplar of the things we enjoy doing. And this is my little family.
Right. Nice. Well, okay. So like how my family overlays with your family is I have a daughter who, and like her mother is from British Columbia. So BC, so the forest, it's all there. We've always done tons of hiking. So this photograph to me is very familiar. It's that idea of, the two in front and me behind to make the photograph as you were. So because I'm like a writer kind of person as well, I'm like, well, everything's a kind of a story, right? Yeah. So the first chapter of the story was this beautiful landscape in Hawaii. The second chapter is this beautiful, intimate photo of your wife and your daughter together. And so you're this small cluster family of you three. What's in this chapter?
Yeah, I think so. It kind of expresses for me the very insular nature of our life thus far. Like we are very much a kind of like a unit of three. We've traveled a lot just since my daughter was born. She was born in Hawaii, and then we lived in Ecuador for about 9 months. And then we traveled in an RV from Savannah, Georgia, actually all the way to Northern California, where this picture was taken.
Dude, this is too funny.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, when this picture was taken was then, and then we flew back to Hawaii after that because we decided to go back to Hawaii for my wife's job for a little bit before we ended up back here in California. So it's like we're very much like we don't really have much of our own community yet. So we're all very close, and it's great. But right now this next chapter is us trying to establish some form of community somewhere, and we're trying to figure out where that's going to be.
Got it. So was this pre-COVID?
This was mid-COVID, so like what happened was in Hawaii, she was born in 2020. So COVID was just exploding real bad.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know what was going to go on. We thought the housing market was going to collapse. Anna's job was in jeopardy. So we sold our house in Hawaii and we moved to a place in Ecuador where COVID was very, very, like the numbers were almost non-existent up in the mountains. That's where I wrote my book, actually, was up in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
And then when things kind of calmed down a bit, that's when we came back to the States.
Well, look at you. What a smarty pants you are. That's where I wrote my book, actually. So bring it back to your book. Okay. First of all, explain to me, please, because I am not American. I am not Christian. I'm not, like we have some things that are really close in terms of how you and I are experienced. But for example, what is evangelical culture world that you kind of broke free from?
Oh, that's
That you'd write a book about it.
it took me quite a few chapters to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the evangelical world view? Is essentially evangelicalism in America today is a conflation between religious and cultural norms. So, like a lot of the evangelical, what we would call evangelical culture, are not things that are based in any form of what we'd say doctrine or.
Mm-hmm.
It is based in doctrine, but like scripture and things. A lot of it is purely cultural, and so
Right.
they're trying to. And that's where Christian nationalism and evangelicalism kind of combine. They're trying to start to enforce their own cultural worldviews onto everybody else.
Okay.
So, like what I kind of tackled the subject from a bit of a humorous standpoint because I grew up in the late O's when like youth group and evangelical like youth activities were at their like peak of ridiculousness, like the things
Mm-hmm.
that we would do in church lock-ins and just stuff like that was so like anyone who would hear some of the things or read some of them in the book would be like, this is real life. People did this stuff. Like we would have CD immolation parties, not CD burning parties where we copy music, but we'd literally have a 50-gallon drum where everyone bring their secular music, their worldly music, their
Mm-hmm.
CDs, put them into the drum and put
To
gasoline on them and
burn.
burn them, right?
Okay.
Because we were separating ourselves from the world.
Right. Right.
That sort of thing. We'd have evangelical, like where we go and evangelize to people on the street, where we'd have like big conventions where people from all over the Midwest would meet, and we are with the goal of like harassing an entire town for 2 or 3 days.
Oh, wow.
Like yeah, that sort of stuff.
What a nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so look, just to give you my like, so I was born in Israel, and so on the spectrum of religiosity in my family, there's secular or atheist, this is me, to the bonkers, the equivalent of evangelical, like orthodox, hyper orthodox, like just completely bonkers, I guess, way of seeing the world. Okay. Oh, I have so many questions for you. Okay, so let's start with writing.
All right.
Where to sit down and write a book, right? Well, you're stuck in Ecuador, so it's like, okay, you have the space and you have the time and you have the whatever, but where did that inclination or impulse go to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to shape this into chapters, into a book?
Oh, I've always written, and I had a collection of different like short, like little stories that had happened to me from when I was traveling or from when I was a kid that I had written down at some point, and I started noticing a trend and a connection between the different stories and different things that I was found important enough to write down. And so I saw the connection there, and I also at the same time had recently kind of more publicly come out of evangelicalism, I
Sorry,
started like,
man. I'm just laughing with you, man.
yeah, no, it's true. So like I started coming out of evangelicalism, and so like I had to, I don't know, I did a lot of research, a lot of history and studying, and I knew the history because history is always what I studied in college and stuff to become a teacher and stuff. So I knew a lot of the history of how Christianity was used around the world as far as American imperialism and that sort of stuff. And I started looking closer into like my like what I had believed and the history behind that. And I found it fascinating, and I was like taking notes and stuff. I was like, I could combine this with my story because there's some parallels, and decided to do it. And then I pitched it to, I don't know, several hundred publishers until one picked it up.
Okay, nice. Well, that's how it always seems to go.
Right.
So this is your first book or your second?
Yes.
Or
First book.
first? Well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's go back to so it's very dangerous to go study history. It's like it'd be like, how could you? I don't understand how a scientist, like a true scientist, could become a scientist and not actually become, and not question everything. So in my case, it would lead to a certain crisis, intellectual crisis of, religion never resonated with me. Like really, even as a kid. So in your case, like, so where did your sort of detachment from the evangelical sort of narrative or story or culture or presence in your life? Like, how did you detach and then get the courage or the impulse to just say, okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. No, I mean, there's no, like, that's one thing is like, there's a series of small events that lead to a watershed moment kind of deal, right? So,
mhm,
um, it's, I think some of the earliest ones, like, there was never really a choice for me as far as when I was a kid on whether or not this like resonated with me or not. I was a Christian, and that was the truth.
mhm.
And anyone else outside it who didn't know that either needed to be saved or they were actively trying to keep me from doing God's work on
Oh,
Earth. So like those were my options there.
wow,
And
wow, wow.
but like even when I believed that, there was like I always felt really guilty about certain things that came natural to me. For example, like I always hated evangelizing to people. Like I
Right.
hated the trying to get someone, like it did not feel loving. It was supposed to be
Sure.
a loving experience. Like you're supposed to be showing your love and God's love to people by trying to
Mhm.
get them to heaven, right? I just absolutely hated it. And I felt terrible about that. I was like, I feel like this is the most cringy, awful thing to be doing. And I couldn't quite understand why, because in my ideology, it should have been the best thing. And so there was that little
Right.
split that started early on. Also, the people I just disliked the most were always the most Christian people. So that was like we used to in school we'd have to do what we called sword drills, which was
Okay.
they would tell us a Bible verse, and we'd have our Bibles in our hands, like above our heads, and then
Yeah.
whoever brought it down and opened it to that verse and read it the first got
Wow.
some prize or whatever, right? We call them sword drills because, and as it was explained by my teacher, was that soon you won't even have to think of anything when something happens to you. The scripture will immediately come to your mind, and
Right.
that was the idea. And I remember thinking, like, but I really don't like people who quote scripture all the time. Like, those people are
Right.
the worst people. So,
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
remember even then being like, I don't want to be that person either.
Yeah.
And the other really big one was in church. So, like, in church, we'd always have someone who would share, a lot of times we have somebody who would share their testimony, which is essentially their story of before they were a Christian, then when they became a Christian, what they're doing now, right? And and I can't think of a single one where I wasn't disappointed at the point where they became a Christian, because when they became a Christian, all of a sudden their stories became way less interesting and
Mhm.
incredibly boring. Whereas their
Mhm.
lives beforehand were usually something pretty interesting and like fun to hear
Mhm.
about. And so I was like, that's probably not a good sign either.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like so. In terms of let's get into the nitty gritty of your book, though. Like, how old is your book?
It just came out last year, less
Okay.
than a year ago. Actually, it came out this year, but it's about to be last year, I suppose.
And so how because look, I think like all art, and to write even a nonfiction book, it is a sort of artistic piece, it's like you never know how it's going to land, right? Like you kind of send it off and it's like, there goes my baby. And some hits, some miss, very much like this podcast maybe. But like what from the publication surprised you?
Yeah, I think one thing that really surprised me, just very practically speaking, was that the majority of books that are published sell under 250 copies.
Hmm.
I just had, I don't know, made my
That's a
assumption.
sobering reality, isn't it?
Exactly, right? And I was like, when I first started looking into it, I was like, 250 copies, like, is that even like worth this endeavor? Like, I mean, that's
Exactly.
like there's no money coming. That's not even about to even pay for like anything, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
and I found that out early on, thankfully,
Right.
because like I wasn't so disappointed later on.
Yeah.
Like I did do better than the average. I feel good about that. But like just the reality that like people spend so much time and effort creating something about and putting something out about themselves, or putting out this work that very few people ever get to read. I always thought like, yeah, maybe 1,000, 2,000 copies
Right.
was average. Like, nah.
And it's funny that like if you listen to somebody like the woman who wrote what's it called, Harry Potter,
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
So when they printed her first book, it was like they printed 500 copies and they thought, well, maybe we'll sell that much. We doubt it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's like it's sold bazillions, right? So it's really it's so hard to know. So again, you're speaking, you're telling me this tale. We're talking about the book. We're talking about, but then also this photo of And really, I'm looking at your little unit, your little family. There's you on the left in video, and then there's your daughter, arms up high, mid-stride. So that's a perfect, really. Actually, both your daughter and Anna are mid-stride, which is just like perfectly timed as far as photographs go. So it really kind of conveys motion. Yeah. So I'll let you say one more thing about this photo, and then we'll move on to the next. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the last thing about this photo that kind of the memory attached to it at least was this was one of the last bit of time before both my wife and I went back to work and stuff, and just the feeling of being able to do what you wanted to do inside of a time frame, like you're not without the constraints of like I have to work here, I've got these hours and things. So like these kind of memories are what drive me to try and find a way of balancing my life and where work is not central, you know?
Got it. Spoken like a true Hawaiian / Californian. Okay, next photo. So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.